Hey everyone, so I'm having a chat with Contrapoints, who you may be familiar with. I'll leave a link to her description in the channel, in the description box, to her channel in the description box. Duh. Right, so Contra, how you doing?
Good, thanks. How about you?
Yeah, really good. I figure it might be worth talking about a couple of the recent videos you've done,
Yeah.
because you have quite a sort of buckshot of points in them, aimed at quite a lot of people, and I think they're really worth discussing, which I take it is why you're here. So, okay, so let's start with fascists. It's something that's coming up
Yes.
a lot. I'm actually rather impressed. You're one of the few people in the I guess social justice YouTube sphere would be a reasonable description, who actually addresses the alt-right on the merits of their arguments as well, or at least, you attempt to. And I think that's rather rare, and most of the time I see people whining about skeptics. So it's interesting that you actually target them. Why do you target them particularly?
Well, it's something I kind of noticed a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, is that these alt-right, sort of white nationalist talking points were getting more and more common on YouTube, off YouTube, on the internet in general. And I initially thought, like, oh gosh, like, I can just show everyone that these are just the talking points that the KKK has used and that Stormfront has used, and then everyone will see that it's bad and they'll all stop. But that didn't happen. It turns out that a lot of people don't really care and find these things sort of convincing. And I guess the reason that I make arguments about it is that I know there are people who are not like horrible people and like dyed in the wool racists, but there are people who are nonetheless are kind of taken in by this line of reasoning, like, well, Japan gets to have a country for Japanese people, why don't white people get to have a country for white people? These kinds of arguments. So I think it's at least worth making the effort to sort of, I'm not trying to debate Richard Spencer. I'm trying to talk to people who find that kind of talking point convincing, and I think that it's worth discussing these points and trying to refute them, and not just. People accuse me of being this person who calls everyone a fascist and everyone a Nazi, and has like no more argument than that. But I think that the talking points that they use at least are worth, debunking, or worth discussing as if they are points.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I actually don't think you're the sort of person who calls everyone a Nazi or a fascist. I think you're quite more than capable of delineating between what you would call centrists, but I think can more reasonably just be called liberals. And obviously Antifa and fascists. You're more than able to make the distinction, so I don't think that's an accurate characterization of you. I think that you're also completely correct in addressing their arguments. This is one of the things about the left that absolutely drives me insane. If you don't address someone's arguments, I have a funny feeling that there's a large slice of the population that immediately gets the impression that you can't address their arguments, which is why you don't. And I'm not saying you can't, but I think that's the impression that comes across. So, you advocated in the last video for deplatforming fascists. I really think that's the wrong way to go about it. The only reason I would see to deplatform fascists is if you can't refute what they're saying,
Yeah, so this is something that I've definitely talked about on my channel, because I sort of I use multiple approaches on my channel. Recently, it's true that identifying fascism and shutting it down is kind of the focus, but in some of my earlier videos on this topic, the focus is more, okay, alt-right people, like, here's me arguing against your position. And I did do a few videos like that. The reason I've kind of gotten wary of that is that I find that a lot of people in the alt-right anyway are very disingenuous arguers, or they're very disingenuous debaters. So I made this video called Debating the Alt-Right that kind of dramatizes this, that has this kind of like milquetoast leftist who's like whiny and offended, and this like Nazi troll kind of like 4chan character who,
Yeah.
because I think the danger of having a fascist up on stage is they can say, like, well, here's a list of all the Jews who are the heads of media companies. Like, isn't that suspicious? Can you refute this information? And to some people, they'll be like, wait, hold on, is that true? Like,
hang on a sec. Why is
Yeah.
that dangerous? Why is that dangerous?
I find it dangerous because giving these positions an audience, or giving them a wide audience anyway, is going to pull a certain number of people in. So I guess what the complaint is like, why would people get pulled in unless the arguments are good? Well, the concern is that like clever rhetoric can pull people in whether the arguments are good or bad. And that's kind of what I'm worried about.
Yeah, but if you're debating them, then you are supposed to challenge them and refute them. And I mean, I think that if there's I hate to invoke Hitchens already, but there's a clip of him that's rather popular of him debating a white nationalist and absolutely thrashing them. Yeah. And that's, I think, a really useful thing. I imagine that's probably been responsible for at least causing some alt-righters to at least have some self-doubt,
Yeah, so I think I'm not completely against the idea of ever debating a white nationalist, but I think that Christopher Hitchens is also a really talented debater and a really talented speaker, and most of us cannot be Christopher Hitchens, and so he can really handle that situation. But a lot of people get, especially when you're. So I'm recalling that particular interview. The guy that he's arguing with it's not Tom Metzger, but the son of.
I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name either. Yeah. But he's denying that he has any, that his movement is interested in any kind of violence. And then Hitchens brings up the fact that their organization is called WAR, White Aryan Resistance, and they publish all these cartoons of Martin Luther King being shot and things, and. The guy, so when you're dealing with someone who's kind of weaseling and denying and stuff, it's difficult to refute their arguments because a lot of the arguments they're putting forward are not sincere. So what you have to do instead is demonstrate the insincerity. Now, Christopher Hitchens can do that because he's a bulldozer when it comes to public debate. Yeah. But it's not most. I can't say that I'm necessarily able to do that.
Well. I mean, I don't think you necessarily have to be a bulldozer to just expose the cracks in it. And honestly, I think most people aren't very well predisposed to this anyway. So if you can do, I think, even just a basic refutation of it, then I think that means more to most people than not trying. Not trying, I think that's a real failure of the left, in fact, in general. The idea of no platforming people over their views, I think that's really hurt the left in terms of almost like marketability. I think there are people who are just well, the left is weak. The left is not where the intellectual integrity is, because they can't stand to hear those people speak, and I don't even know what those people think. So, I think the average person finds that to be a turn-off, which, honestly, the way the left's going at the moment, maybe that's a good thing. I have to say, I have very little sympathy for either side at this point. Call me a filthy centrist if you like, but from a liberal point of view, this isn't going well. So the marketability of the left is actually kind of the subject of the next video that I'm working on, which is going to be about what I also perceive as this problem. Now, I think it sounds like you mostly blame the left for this. I think that they could make things better for themselves, but I also think that part of the problem is just the way as I see it, the way current media works, it's really difficult for anyone who is sort of these centrist views are sort of the default. You have people who are very well backed by, you don't get. I'm trying to remember where I was going with this. The issue is basically that I think that when you have, what I disagree with the Dave Rubin position is that I think that someone like that, he's giving a platform to all these people who have been deplatformed, right? And he's doing this ostensibly because he's interested in freedom of speech and, giving a voice to everyone. But the result of this is that he ends up giving a platform to a lot of very right-wing people, and then he cultivates a very right-wing audience. I think I might accuse you of the same thing. To some extent, right, is that you complain a lot about the left is silencing all these groups, but then that ends up cultivating an audience that is interested in those groups and what they have to say. I don't think it does. I actually polled my channel points, and most of my channel seem to be disenfranchised left-wing, sort of centre-left liberal types.
Yeah.
I've got about, I think 35% is libertarian types, and then the remaining few percent are between the sort of authoritarian left and right. So I don't think it does. I mean, I have started to, because I don't talk about atheism much, I think I have started to cultivate a few Christian conservative types who they very much like me. It's like, oh, just don't let me talk about religion around you, I suppose, because that'll change. But the thing is, I don't think that really matters, because I mean, like, these things seem like facile judgments to me, when I think a large portion of your audience will be sort of hard left, socialist, anti-far supporting types, and I find those just as repugnant as the fascists. So, I mean, you know, you can say, well, you've got, you know, some fascists watching you. Well, I've got about 2,000 or 3,000. Actually, and I think your video had about 3,000 downvotes, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3,000 downvotes. I think it's largely the same group of people in roughly the same numbers. There aren't actually that many of them, but I think the more that the left goes on about sort of white identity and all that sort of stuff, I think the more they're going to grow, because I really think the left has set the stage for what we're seeing in the alt-right. I don't think the alt-right could have set the environment quite how the left has done it. They've said, right, okay, black people good, white people can shut up. And when you dichotomize things in that way, something's naturally going to rush up to fill the void. And then the left turn around and say, wait, you're not allowed that. When these people are allowed that, is going to naturally engender resentment to you. And not just from people in the alt-right. I mean, you know, anti-identitarian people like myself, I resent you doing that. You know, I don't want those people to have a special privilege based on the fact that they're black, that you're going to deny to white people based on the fact that they're white. That, to me, that's textbook racism. So what do you make of that?
Well, so I guess just to stick with your last point, I think that, to me, it's not about... Well, I think that these things that you see, and that I assume a lot of your audience would see as, you know, racial minorities getting special privileges, white people being told to shut up, white people, you know, being disadvantaged in all these ways by leftists. Yeah. I don't really see a lot of these things as being unjust. So I think, like, a point of disagreement would be, like, the most recent, like, N-word controversy. Like, can you tell white people not to say the N-word while black people can say it? Like, to me, it's not a major injustice to ask white people not to say the N-word. Why? Because it has a very different meaning when they say it, or it has a different effect. And because society places other kinds of restrictions on people of color, you know, because lots of employers tend to be white, and people in more powerful positions tend to be white.
Okay. Before we go on to the sort of social justice explanation of it, I find it very interesting that you say unjust. That wasn't the word I was expecting you to say, because that means that what you're saying is racial discrimination is just if it's just being done the right way. And I don't agree with that. I don't think racial discrimination is ever just, regardless of how well intentioned it is.
So what I think is that what the goal is, racial justice is not necessarily racial equality in the sense of treating everyone exactly the same. Because if you're in circumstances where people are not equal to begin with, justice may not be equal treatment for everyone. You know what I mean? Like, so suppose there's like
I think I get
wheelchairs or something to go around, and there's 15 people who can't walk. Like, obviously those are the people who should get the wheelchairs, and not people who can walk. Like,
but black people aren't disabled.
They're not disabled.
Yeah, but that's the point. I don't believe they're so disadvantaged that we should treat them that way.
I'm not saying that they're disabled, but I'm saying there are major, at least in the United States, there are major social economic disadvantages that come with being black on average. And I don't think that trying to address those things, which is going to involve treating the black group somewhat different than the white group in certain circumstances, I don't think addressing those things amounts to injustice or unfairness.
Yeah, but what you're saying is if the only way to address these things is via racial discrimination, then you are saying that racial discrimination is just.
Only in certain circumstances where you're making... only in certain circumstances. Like, all else being equal, right? So, like, in perfect world where, there has never been any racism and there's no inequality, like, yeah, it would be unfair if like the black people can say a word that the white people don't get to, but like that's not the world that we're in.
Well, no, I'm not even worried about the word thing. I'm more worried about things like quotas, affirmative action, and just the general media attitude towards black and white people. And the thing is, the problems that you're complaining about, the unfairnesses that happened in the past, that you want to rectify with further unfairnesses, isn't going to change the fact that unfairnesses are happening. I mean, two wrongs and whatnot. So this is never going to create a world without racial discrimination, which is surely ideally the world we want to reach.
I think that I don't view these things as unfairnesses if they genuinely are going to rectify the previously existing unfairnesses. So, I mean, why is there such racial economic disparity in the United States? It's not because of the free market. It's because of this long history of exploitation, slavery, housing inequality, lack of opportunity, and things like that.
I don't agree. No, I don't agree. I mean, like, married black couples in the US make almost as much as married white couples. So it's not just that black people make less just because they're black. There are specific things that black people do that mean they end up earning less over their lifetimes and encounter more social problems. These are specific expressions from certain black communities, and they seem to be fairly widespread from what I can tell, but there are definitely black communities that aren't like that and that have more solid sort of foundations, and they don't have these problems. So I don't think you can necessarily chalk this up to racism. I think maybe this is really where my contention comes from. The left doing this is the left treating black people like they have no agency of their own. I mean, you're never going to get people to take responsibility for their actions as long as you say, well, don't worry, it's because we're racist.
So it seems like I'm obviously not saying that all black people are the same or all black people are disadvantaged. No, we're talking about like big trends. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is you're making a kind of like personal responsibility argument, or like there's something wrong with, I feel like maybe you're going to like there's something wrong with the black family or something is up
There's
next.
Absolutely something wrong with the black family, yeah.
Yeah. So what I think is that if you look at like West Baltimore, or for instance, where like poverty is pretty extreme, what you see is like it's not just like a cultural problem that for some reason like the fathers just don't like taking care of their kids or anything. Like what you have is like this long history of housing discrimination, like in the 20s and 30s, like black people like legally not being able to buy houses in white neighborhoods, and this has produced this kind of seclusion, this ghettoization, and then consequent poverty, crime, which leads to aggressive policing and incarceration, which weakens families because you have missing men, and like so there's these kind of big.
But this is all excuses, though. This is all excuses because no, it is right. Something that happened almost 100 years ago didn't affect whether a woman decided to marry the father of her child. And a woman marrying the father of her child means that she's much more likely to raise a child that is emotionally stable and has a promising education and financial future. More likely to get in school, more likely to get a job, more likely to be financially successful. This is a fact. This is what we know from just humankind. And when this breaks down, you see massive societal problems. And this happens in England, like for example, like Glasgow or Moss Side or something like that. You get a problem with troubled teenagers who are mostly male, who don't have father figures, and almost 3/4 of black kids are being born out of wedlock at this point. In Britain, it's half of just children in general, and we have a massive problem with this. And so it's like it's not a race thing, it's not a racism thing, it's a family thing. And the thing is, we know that like black families who get married and stay married do fine. They do just fine. And I honestly think that this is the left's incapability of really seeing black people as people and accepting that they made choices that were bad choices, and there's nothing you can do if these people are going to make bad choices. That's the problem. I mean, how do you make a kid stay in school? So when you say see people as people, what you seem to mean is sees people as fundamentally responsible for their own destiny or their own choices. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean,
people with agency of their own. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, everyone to some extent is always responsible for their own choices, and also everyone to some extent is the product of circumstances, right? Like there's these two things going on. Like yes, you choose what to do with the situation that you're given, but also you often do not choose the situation that you're given. And so when there's a massive inequality in terms of the situation that people are, the life situation where people are growing up, for instance. And then, yeah, that is okay. They might make what seem like bad choices in that situation, but also like they don't have the same opportunity to make good choices as people in a better situation. So it's not that I'm denying them agency. It's that I'm saying that those choices have to be understood in a context where may not be good options available, or where those good options are much more difficult.
Okay, I think that's easy to say, but when the options are not having a bunch of kids out of wedlock, and for young ladies, and for young men it's stay in school and get your grades, I think these are not difficult choices to make, no matter how poor, no matter how desolate, no matter how stupid you are, no matter how backwards you are. Understanding that you probably should get married before you have kids, you probably should stay in school and finish your education if you'd like to get a good job. These are pretty rudimentary concepts that I think everyone understands, right?
Well, they seem rudimentary, but I mean, in places where people don't have a good education about this kind of stuff, a lot of people actually are pretty ignorant about like how not to get pregnant, and like may not have the reproductive care access that other people have. And so what looks like a decision or like a reckless child having for no reason can often, there's a reason why you don't see, wealthy college students having lots of kids when they're 20 years old.
I agree.
And it's not just because they have more discipline and self-control. It's because they have more education. They have like a social network around them that's kind of making it easier for them.
Yeah. We normally call that like family, don't we?
Well, it's not just family though. It's family and also education, and it's your whole community.
Yeah, but I think all of that, the root of that is having a stable family life. And if black parents aren't marrying, then they can't provide this stable family life. So I think I honestly do think it comes right down to the fact that black men and women aren't getting married. I really think that's a problem, and I really think that, I mean, you can read Thomas Sowell, where he puts the blame of this on the welfare state, because it gave the opportunity for black women to have children without getting married, and they decided to take it. And up until that point, I mean, black marriage rates were better than white marriage rates. And then after that point, you see it shoot up. And then, 15 years later, you see young black crime rates shoot up. And it's just, well, these kids have been born out of wedlock. They've grown up in fatherless homes without strong male guidance. And young men need strong male guidance. And they become delinquents. And it's an eminently predictable pattern. And the left has concocted wild, convoluted, conspiratorial, institutional racism everywhere, when really we need to be saying to these families, look, you're going to have to get married. You're going to have to do it for the future of your own community and your own sons. I mean, it's totally irresponsible.
But again, this idea that like the way to fix the black family is to just scold people into doing it, like this, it seems to me to rest on the assumption that the problem going on is like a lack of self-control and discipline, or something, like some kind of personal moral fault.
Well, I'm sure
instead
it's
of
different
looking
for
at
each
the
one. I'm sure it's different for each person, but the thing is, I mean, what would you do with a white community that was having a real problem with single motherhood and delinquent children? You would tell them, you would pressure them, wouldn't you? You would say, look, you have to stop doing this. And then, I mean, maybe you would have to get to the point where you're cutting off welfare benefits or something like that to force them to do something about the fact that they've got themselves into that mess. I mean, they chose to have children out of wedlock. No one can take responsibility for that for them.
I don't think that's at all. No, I wouldn't treat white people any differently in that situation. Like in America, we actually do have this growing problem with like white poverty in Appalachia and things. Like there's increasing like opium addiction as a result, and all these other crime, social problems. But again, like the problem isn't that just the white people in Appalachia just suddenly decided to stop working and be getting married. It's that the industries that were in those areas have gone away, and now there's no opportunity. And they're so it's not a failure it's not an individual moral failure. It's a failure
I wasn't making it moral.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting thing. It's not that I agree. I'm not even ascribing a moral judgment to this, but there's no getting around the fact that these actions produce these consequences. There's no point blaming people for what already exists. They won't change anything. But we've got to. I mean, this just has to be. It has to sink into the culture. The understanding that single-parent households, unfortunately, are bad for children. And a welfare state that supports single-parent households as a matter of course. And I tell you what, I've lived in really poor communities, and I swear to God, on every council estate in Britain, we have women who just, I mean, young women, like, 16, 17, 18, who will just go, well, I'm just going to have a bunch of kids and then the government will pay for me to have a house. That is a career path for these women. And I bet you there are women like that in black neighborhoods as well. So the problem is they're not stupid. That's the thing. They know how to game the system, and again, it's I don't like saying it. I'm not against any of these people, but there are people like that and we need to start acknowledging it.
So, fine. Okay, we decide that people living on welfare is a problem. Like, then the problem, right, is that they're not working. Well, in a lot of situations, the fact that they're not working is not necessarily, it's not entirely.
That's not true. That's not true. It's not the problem is not that they're not working necessarily. I mean, that's a problem if you're like a libertarian type who wants to cut the welfare state down and wants to lower the taxes and stuff like that. I'm not necessarily that way. The problem for me is the breakdown of the family structure, and unfortunately, I think that in general, human beings are only... I mean, eventually, when human beings don't actually need each other, they won't. I think they'll become like hypersensitive to each other, and there'll be probably an elaborate set of formal rituals, like checking people's pronouns to see if you associate with a certain person. Because when people need each other, then they have to accept and deal with their faults and get over it. But when they don't need each other and they can just say, you know what, right, fuck it, I'm leaving, they will. Because they have an alternative. I'm not sure that should be an alternative. I think it should be a safety net rather than a choice you actively make in your lifetime, So
again, I'm not like disputing the idea that having a secure family environment is a helpful thing. Of course it is. But like, if we want people to do that, and we notice that people in certain situations are as a group not doing that, what is the most effective way to bring about to fix that situation?
That's
right?
A good question. I mean, I certainly don't want to force them to get married. I don't want to force anyone to do anything. But I do think we have to stop making excuses. I think we have to. I mean, we are in the. I mean, there are no better countries than Western countries. I think we need to stop declaring that they are racist or white supremacist and things like this. And the left does this all the time.
But if these things, I don't see it as an excuse. I see it as an explanation. Like, I'm not trying to again, it's not about like exonerating them necessarily of some like moral judgment. It's about the fact that they, there's a reason why it's not, individuals don't just vary at random in terms of whether they end up in these circumstances. The variance is based on things like class and based on things like race and where, what kind of neighborhood you live in, the wealth of your parents, the wealth of your community. That's the kind of stuff that leads to these things. So why not address the underlying issue, which in so many of these cases is just poverty? It's not, I don't see that as an excuse. Because I see that as an explanation.
But it is an excuse because it's inherently telling them that there's nothing they can do about it. Right? And in fact, there is a great deal they can do to get out of poverty. And finishing school, getting married before having children out of wedlock, whatnot. This is almost a guaranteed way out of poverty. And yet, if we don't encourage that, then more and more people are going to not do that. And you're going to find these communities increasingly degenerating, which is what I think is happening. Whereas, I mean, my parents are a perfect example of this. My parents are both council estate children. My dad grew up in a caravan with 5 brothers because my grandparents are so poor. And so he decided to get a career in the military, and he married my mother, and now I became nice and middle class. It's a lovely success story, and it's not difficult. It's literally open to anyone. It just takes, and you can't, that's, any particular avenue that would do that would be fine, working anywhere. But it's a pretty stock pattern, and I mean, the left is definitely not like a pro-marriage movement, is it? And I really think that that's doing a disservice to the people it claims to help. And in fact, I think that's one of the primary ways that it's kind of messing up.
So you're claiming that it's that of course individual people can get out of bad circumstances, right? Yeah. Like, yes, there are people who are born in the ghetto and who go on to become like, great stars in athletics or other things. They go on to, they get out of the situation, they get an education somehow, and they go on to have careers, but or they go on to be middle class. But to say that it's not difficult, I don't agree that it's not difficult.
I didn't
think
say
that
it
if
wasn't difficult. I didn't say it wasn't difficult. Everything.
think you said it wasn't
No,
difficult.
no. It will certainly be difficult. I mean, it's actually.
Yeah.
I mean, what I was saying was actually predicated on the idea that it is difficult. It's a lot easier to just go, fuck it, I won't be married to this person anymore, or I'll just become a single mother or a single dad. The difficult bit is staying together and making the marriage work. It is definitely difficult.
But I also think that getting married isn't going to make you middle class. Like,
not guaranteed. No. But it's married black couples make almost as much as married white couples. It's not. It is definitely a significant aid in financial stability and prosperity. For good reasons. I mean, you get two incomes in one house, things like this. It's basic economics, isn't it? There are obvious advantages to this, and it's good for the emotional health of children, and it'll end up reducing the crime rate in neighborhoods. It'll probably end up increasing, property ownership, things like this. It just seems to be how humans best function.
Okay, well, so if we grant, I'll grant that all of that's true. If that's true, I still think that the best way to get to that situation is in environments where lots of men are in jail. Like, we have to look at the causes of crime, which doesn't mean just telling people not to commit crime. I mean, because it's like you're saying that it's just like a feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
Where you're saying like, oh, you have to, you need stable family environments in order to raise successful children, but also like you can't have these stable environments because like you have, like 1 in 10, I think it's like 1 in 10 black men in America is in prison, and like it's hard to have a stable environment in those circumstances. So but then if your only solution to that is like, well, we need to have stronger families, like how does this get out of the loop without some kind of intervention on the economic and social circumstances?
Well, I mean, like you were saying, you said correctly that people can only come out of poverty individually. We can't do anything about them collectively. We have to deal with them as individual cases, and we have to help individual. I guess we would be looking at. I suppose if you didn't want to have like marriage incentives, you could just whatever, whoever. But we've got to look at each case individually and help that individual person out of poverty. And this is where I think the socialists are going completely wrong, and why they never win the working class. The working class don't want handouts; they want opportunities. And so what you need is for a working class person of any race, obviously, to be able to go to the government or whoever's doing and say, look, I want to do X, I'll need Y and Z to get there, so can someone help me out? And assuming they actually want to do this, whatever vetting procedure there is, I have absolutely no problem with sort of state aid for programs like this. Absolutely none. My problem is when this is based on race, because the problem isn't that they're black, the problem is that they're poor. And if the problem is that they're poor, it's not just black people who are poor, so why don't we just help poor people rather than poor black people? It seems deliberately exclusionary, But the point is, we can help them on an individual basis, but what doesn't help them is, and I really think this definitely applies for black communities, is telling them that the country they live in is racist. That is such a demotivational and dangerous thing to do. Because I've spoken to loads of people who grew up in like various black communities around the US, and I've seen like loads of viral videos of this sort of thing, and it seems to be a common thing that they have an attitude that they say to each other, the white man is trying to hold you back. The white man doesn't want you to do this. The white man doesn't want you to succeed. And I've seen loads of videos from black people saying, I met white people and they didn't care about me. They didn't want me to not succeed, but they just didn't care. They didn't think about me. The white man is not trying to hold you back. This is something we tell ourselves. And when you have radical left-wingers going, by the way, America's racist and it's oppressing black people, all you're doing is feeding into that. And that's a form of paranoia that these communities have developed. And I'm not saying it's unjust. I'm not saying there isn't historical reasons or context or anything of the sort. But if you actually want solutions, I don't think running around claiming your country's racist is the answer, because I don't think it is.
Well, I think it's more of a question. It's not just a question of individual people's prejudices and attitudes. Like, and so I live in Baltimore. In case in Baltimore, like there's a massive like geographical and like racial split between black communities and white communities, and in the last 100 years, these were often enforced by law or by sort of like contracts and agreements between, landlords and things, and that sort of kept black people in poor neighborhoods and sort of like protected white people in their own fenced-off areas. Yeah. So and these, it's 2017, and these lines are still drawn, and like the situation still holds, and the black neighborhoods in general have worse schools. They have, in the worst places, there's like lead paint and things, and like it's poisoning children, and like, so okay, it's not just the problem at this point of like what white people think and what their attitudes are. It's that like the history of racism is now kind of like built into the city, and so in order to fix that problem, something has to be done. Like, this is like a big infrastructure problem that's not just a matter of changing people's attitudes. So when we say that America's racist, it's not just that it's filled with like people with racist attitudes. It's also just that like the way the whole country is built is designed to privilege white people.
Yeah, it was. I'll agree that it was like 100 to like 50 years ago. I completely agree, but you can't ever move past this if you hang this over the heads of people constantly. That's the problem.
Well, it's not about hanging it. It's not about hanging it over their heads. It's about trying to fix it.
Yeah, but the thing is, the solution you want can't come until there has been a fundamental shift in attitudes. Because no matter what you give these communities, they're always going to blame their problems on whitey. And while they're blaming their problems on whitey, they're not taking responsibility for their own mistakes themselves. And so they will continue making the same mistakes, and every time saying, well, it was the white man. No matter how much the white man gives them, they'll never get out of that hole. And so at some point, you have to go, right, okay, the actual solution is to be treating them like we would treat other white people. And if we found a community, a ghetto of white people, we wouldn't just be like, you know what, just have loads of stuff. We would not do that. And so
I agree with you that all these problems cannot just be solved by white people, that there has to be initiative from within black communities, for example. But I think if you look into these communities, you find that initiative exists. Like, there's a lot of community organizing that goes on, and organizing to stop gun violence, and organizing to, you just don't see this kind of stuff on the news, or white people don't see it on the news. But there's a lot.
I know it exists, but I think it's around the wrong subjects. I mean, obviously, gun violence, obviously. But I mean, that's a symptom of the problem, rather than addressing the root of the cause. And I mean, as much as I hate to say it, maybe they need Christianity. Maybe they need the sort of evangelical Christianity that values marriage. I hate it.
I don't agree that the family thing is the root of the problem. I think it's like maybe the stem or or somewhere along in the problem, but it's not. I don't think it's the root. I think the root is the economical and social disadvantage.
That's caused by broken families.
I don't think but it's not caused by broken families. I mean, historically, like we just said, like it's caused by the fact that there is this deliberate.
But historically was 100 years ago. Now is now.
Well, it's not just 100 years ago. I mean, it's up until the 60s, really.
Yeah, okay, well, 57 years ago then.
The thing is that once your cities are split up and divided on racial lines, like, that doesn't go away in a matter of 2 decades or 3 decades. Like,
that shouldn't necessarily be a death blow to the black family or the economy there. It's only a death blow because they're not being economically productive, and one way to be economically productive is to get married. Because it saves you as a family unit money. You end up with a better quality of life. And
I grant that like, getting married is one way to help, but also it helps to also have
it's not
education.
Exactly, yeah, but
in an area where there's opportunity to get good jobs.
Yeah, exactly. But how do you keep black kids in school?
Well, again, it's a complicated.
The parents have to keep them in school, and being a single parent is difficult, man. It's really tough. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a single parent. It's hard controlling kids. It's hard, especially when they become rebellious teenagers who don't have a strong father figure to honestly live in fear of. It is scary. And these people, they have to understand that all of these have a knock-on effect to the point where you've got 15, 16-year-old kids dropping out of school with no grades. What are they going to do now? Well, you know what they're going to do, and that's why you're going to end up with a much higher percentage of them committing crimes and therefore going to jail or getting shot by the cops. And it's like, okay, even if the system was entirely racist, not taking these actions would be good for these communities anyway. And I think it would be, I mean, really important. But I mean, we really got off topic because I actually wanted to talk to you about your videos. I didn't think this was going to get sucked into it. But we can talk about this another time if you want. Because I really think it's important for the left to kind of understand these things. But so yeah, okay. So I found your characterization of fascists interesting. I take it you mean it as like a modern definition of what a fascist is, rather than like a political science definition.
Yeah, so a lot of people took issue with this definition I give of contemporary fascism, if I say, where I basically just describe it as white nationalism. So yeah, no, I'm not talking about like Italian militarism and expansionism from the 1930s. So that's obviously not what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm using the way I use the words fascists and Nazi, I basically use them as main words for white nationalists.
I know. I gathered that. That's I just wanted to clear that up. Okay, so I'm happy to call them fascists, but I think, honestly, I think calling them fascists is giving them more credit than they deserve. The fascists have kind of a cool factor about them, and I hate to say it, but they kind of do. The Nazis look good in their uniforms. There's no getting around that. They were successful. They, the huge praise. Hey, I can see why people are attracted to that kind of thing. It is kind of cool, especially if you've got a bunch of like blue-haired hipsters telling you, "Oh, that's not cool." For young men, I can see an appeal.
So, saying that you think that the appeal of Nazism is that for these like
not the only appeal, but it's
guys that they have like, oh, I'm like so edgy because I'm a Nazi. I mean, I think like that if you go on like 4chan and stuff, yes, that is definitely part of the appeal. Is that these guys do think they're badasses with but I think that also outside of a 4chan kind of space, Nazi and fascism are pretty strong in terms of words that discourage people from following someone. Like, they're pretty discrediting.
They are.
Where I think there's a reason why you see people try to use these, elaborate euphemisms. I'm a white identitarian. I'm a white nationalist. I'm a ethno-European nationalist. Like, the reason is that they're trying to give more respectability to their views.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, like, it's a double-edged sword. Because of the power of the word fascism, it makes the fascists powerful. I appreciate that in real life it is generally something that shuts down debate, but you addressed it in your video, they can just easily say, well, I'm not a fascist. And the thing is, when someone says I'm not a fascist, it's usually more credible than calling someone a fascist. Even if they're alt-right, even if they're like Richard Spencer, he can say, look, I'm not a Nazi, I don't have any Nazi regalia, okay, he did say hail Trump, hail our people, so maybe that wouldn't help his case, but he can at least argue the toss to say I'm not a Nazi or I'm not a fascist. Whereas if you call them white identitarians, they can't argue that, And I think the problem that the left has with that, despite the fact that it's A, I think a more accurate term, and B, I mean, I think to a lot of like liberal-minded people, that's just as bad a term. But I think that the left's problem with this is that they're very much in favour of identitarianism.
Well, I don't think there's I don't believe in an equivocation between white identitarianism and movements for racial equality, for instance, because even Black Lives Matter is not saying we want a black ethno-state, we want only black people. Like, they're saying like we want to reduce police brutality and these other things. Like, I view those as very different.
I think that's a rather watered down version of some of the rhetoric I've heard from Black Lives Matter. I mean, I've all the sort of like we kill pigs, all my heroes kill pigs, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so you can find videos of people chanting that, but like, what is the core of what the movement is about? What are the college student protesters who are using that slogan? Like, what are the major organizations and websites? If you read it, what their demands are, it's not like death to cops, black ethno-state. It's much more modest and reasonable things.
But the thing is, couldn't you apply that to the alt-right as well, though? Because, I mean, for most of them, they seem to want fairly reasonable things, like they want to end mass immigration. They don't necessarily want special treatment for non-white people because they feel it disadvantages white people. I mean, these aren't irrational, unreasonable things either.
So the alt-right, but the thing is that the alt-right is being disingenuous because they're not telling you the extent. If someone is genuinely alt-right, if they're telling you about immigration, they're not really conveying the full extent of what they think, right? They want to end mass immigration as step one in a project to secure a white ethno-state.
Yeah, but the Black Lives Matter types are complete Marxists. There are loads and loads of hardcore Marxists in the Black Lives Matter movement. They're not just, for them it's not just, end police violence. That's step one for them, for their plan to end liberalism, to end Western civilization, to end capitalism, all this sort of stuff. So I just find it totally disingenuous to sit there and go, well, they have an ulterior motive, but Black Lives Matter and their supporters don't. It's like, yes, they do. Both of these groups have an ulterior motive.
So I guess this might be dropping the bomb here, but I don't think that Marxism is comparable to National Socialism as in terms of how sinister it is as a long-term goal. Like the Marxism, what do they want? They want a classless society of no capitalism and economic equality. Okay, maybe you don't agree with that goal, or you think that what would have to be done in order to attain that goal would be monstrous or something. Yeah. It's still not as bad. It's still not as bad. It's still like a goal that I find much more. It's not as sinister as the goal to have a white ethno-state that eliminates. All other races of people.
I completely disagree in the other direction. I don't find fascism sinister. I find it brutish. I find it primitive, almost. It's just raw, chest-beating tribalism, and it's not very difficult to see it for what it is. But I disagree when it comes to any variant of Marxism. It's incredibly sinister, and it's incredibly subversive, and they are very eager to adopt the term liberal until it's inconvenient, or until they're in private circles. I mean, they will often say something, I'm a liberal, I'm a socialist, and I say, well, pick one. Because they're mutually exclusive. And I totally disagree about the sort of dangers of it. There comes inbuilt in both of these philosophies a group of people that must be shot in order to realise them. So I don't see any moral difference there.
So I mean, I will take issue with people who are on the far left who take this kind of like Stalinist or Leninist approach, where they think that actually we do need like a violent revolution.
Yeah.
That's something that I think has to be opposed from within the left, because I don't think that this is a good idea.
Well, can I stop you there? Why don't you think that's a good idea?
I think that it is not likely to work in the way that they think it will work, and that it is not, and that things aren't. I think in order to justify a violent revolution, things have to be pretty bad, and things are not bad enough.
See, it concerns me that you didn't say because it's immoral to kill people.
Well, do you think that no revolution is justified?
I didn't think no revolution is justified.
I mean,
but the difference is, if I were revolting against someone who was actively oppressing me, at least I would tell myself it's wrong for me to kill people, but I'm going to have to do it anyway. Whereas for you didn't even consider it to be a wrong. It just wouldn't work.
Oh, yeah, no. So it's not just that it wouldn't work, it's that there would be a human cost, and that there would be damage to society and to the people, Yeah,
but the problem is the sphere of moral consideration within the philosophy. It's okay to shoot fascists.
Yeah.
In fact, it's desirable to shoot fascists.
So I think... So sorry, you think that your complaint is that to the Marxists, they think that it becomes totally morally unproblematic to be killing fascists?
Yes, it becomes desirable.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a kind of issue where sometimes people do put... I think part of what it means to be a Marxist is that they often do put their politics over morality, right? The political goals are more important than the moral goals. Than their personal moral goals, which I don't myself agree with. But I also think that saying there's some circumstances where it's okay to shoot fascists, I mean, I don't think it's as sinister as it sounds. I mean, we all none of us feel especially guilty about World War II and our involvement in World War II, which killed I don't need to say how many millions of people.
Yeah.
So there's situations where people die and you kill people, and it's bad that you're killing them. And did those German 17-year-olds in the army deserve to all die? No, but.
Well, no, I don't agree that war is a moral issue. When it comes to the battlefield, there's nothing immoral about shooting enemy soldiers. But the problem is, we're not really talking about battlefield. We're talking about the domestic politics of the country, it will not be seen as immoral to execute fascists. I mean, the main argument I hear from any version of communist or Marxist, and I don't just mean the Stalinists, I mean the people who are much more like you. I'm sure you'd prefer like a peaceful transition into state socialism to communism eventually. Even those people don't find it immoral. I mean, I've had them literally say, well, they were only shooting fascists. And it's like, okay, that's the problem. The morality is dictated by your ideological framework. And if you have an ideological framework that rescinds the moral consideration, moral franchise from certain groups of people on certain basis, then it will always be acceptable, if not desirable, to murder those people. This is why collectivism is a moral inferior to any individualist philosophy.
Well, again, I think that people in any political view can basically look at their opponents and dehumanize them and end up advocating violence and not consider the full humanity of them. But again, I don't see how this is in any way specific to leftists. Like in the United States, like how much fuss is there about the however many people who died in Iraq simply because we were the sort of vindictive paranoia about 9/11, like. I
totally agree. I was against the Iraq War as well, but I'm not suggesting it's only applies to the left. I mean, this obviously applies to the right as well. This is it's exactly the same moral framework as fascism, basically. It's any collectivism, and this is why I could never be a collectivist, because I could never accept that there are just a group of people who are just the problem before we achieve our political solutions. I find that really problematic.
I guess I don't really see that what the individual versus collectivist distinction is doing here. Like, you think that being having a collectivist political view makes you inherently disregard the individual lives of people or something?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It by necessity requires you to have an outgroup that aren't worthy of moral consideration, whereas an individualist system doesn't. There is no outgroup. It's for literally every single one. And so regardless of whether they're fascist or communist, it's not acceptable to just shoot them, unless, of course, they're leading an armed revolution against the democratically elected government of your beautiful capitalist state.
Well, doesn't any political group have an outgroup that it defines itself against? Like, even if you're a capitalist centrist, like aren't like both sides extremists? Aren't those then the outgroup?
No, they both still have rights, which is why I'm forced to argue for the platforming of fascists, because they have rights too.
I mean, it's not that fascists don't have rights, and I mean, I think, especially, I don't want there to be violence. I don't even want there to be violence against fascists, but I think that could become necessary as fascists gain power, and I don't want that to happen.
I agree, but I feel the same way about the Marxists. You see, I don't personally want to have to go and fight communists, but I mean, it will eventually happen. It won't be me either. It'll be like the Proud Boys, all these sort of Western chauvinist types. They hate communists, and justly so. And if the left would stop producing communists, there would be far less of these people.
But why is their killing communists or whatever, how is that worse than the left killing fascists?
It's basically the same.
Yeah.
But it's the communists who they want to take over. Obviously, just like the fascists want to take over. But the thing is, you can't do that. We live in liberal systems for a reason, because if you take over, then the death squads come. It's always the same with any collectivist ideology. The only way to avoid that is with an individualist ideology. I mean, you guys can... And the thing is, liberalism is tolerant enough to allow the existence of fascism and communism. The problem is that fascism and communism won't tolerate each other, and that's why they're now fighting in the streets. And I mean, I can't see any moral justification for it. If the justification is they exist, it's like, well, I'm sorry that they exist, but that doesn't give you moral license to attack them. And in fact, being citizens with rights, they still get to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, when it comes to like street violence and fights between communists and fascists, like you have to analyze these things on case by case basis. Like I think that I mean, it would be hard to have a conversation about this without getting really bogged down into like specific instances and who started it and who was defending themselves and who was attacking.
Well, I agree on the individual judgment, but the reason this is happening, I mean, you don't get gangs of liberals opposing each other in the street, even though some might be like centre-left pro-gay marriage liberals and some might be centre-right anti-gay marriage liberals because of their Christian values. You didn't see them like, bludgeoning each other in the street mercilessly. They still gave each other moral consideration, even if they disagreed. Whereas the fascists and the communists can't do that. They are each other's mortal enemy. And, neither of them like the liberals either. So the liberals will get the bullet too from both sides. So this is the problem that I have with the left. And the thing is, the way the left has been comporting itself, it genuinely is creating Nazis. It is the reason these guys are coming into existence.
So you seem to think that you seem to be characterizing the left as this really like this group of people where they're all advocating like violent revolution.
No, not all of them, but for the percentage of them that there are. You know what I'm talking about. So let's not get bogged down in unnecessary distinctions. You know what I'm talking about.
I'm aware that there are people who advocate that, but I don't think that it's most of the people on the left by any means.
I didn't say it was most. I just said it was the left, as in there are factions within the left advocating.
Why make this generalization about the left if it's not true of most of them?
Because it's true of some of them.
But that doesn't justify a generalization about
the rest of them make excuses for the some of them. I mean, you sit there and say, well, I am against violence. Okay, but how are you going to prevent a tankie from being against violence? How are you going to prevent them from doing violence? And when they do violence, what are you going to do to stop them? You're not going to personally intervene. You're even going to give them cover, I think. You will end up arguing in their case because they are on the same ideological team as you. That's the problem I think most people have.
I don't think I'm going to end up justifying tanky violence.
Really?
I don't think so.
When do you ever condemn Antifa?
I condemned it after Trump's inauguration, and there were people smashing windows in the streets.
Okay, and then when there were people violently attacking the alt-right, did you condemn it then?
At the time, I got into all kinds of trouble with the people on the left for being very reticent about the Richard Spencer punching.
Okay, and what did you say?
I said that I thought that, I've actually become, like, more, if anything, more of the kind of leftist that you're talking about than I used to be. I, at the time, was thinking, like, we don't want to establish a political environment where there's, like, a normalization of just violence against people, even if those people are fascists, because it's going to end up with retaliation and things are just going to escalate and escalate and escalate. I still basically think that. I think that there are certain situations where, in like these like street fighting contexts, like violence is probably justified. But I think that as a general rule, punching someone out in public for being a fascist is like, I don't know. Like I can see. I think there are situations where it could be a net good if it like shuts down anyone else who's interested in starting up this really hateful stuff. But I think that if you can think of any other way not to do that, it's better to not to do that, because I think that sort of vigilante violence in general is not, it's hard to control at, and so it's only a matter of time before it's used incorrectly and it's used unfair. You know what I mean? People who shouldn't be.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of bothered that you're making pragmatic arguments rather than points of principle.
Yeah.
Do you in principle disagree with the idea of punching Nazis? And we're not talking in a time of war. We're just talking someone standing there in an SS uniform just happily minding his business. Is it wrong to punch that person in principle?
I don't have a universal in principle declaration against that. No. I think that there are situations where it might be permissible or it might be okay.
Can you give me an example of a Nazi just standing there doing nothing? How's it okay to punch him?
Well, a Nazi just standing there doing nothing, probably not. But
probably not.
Yeah, probably not. I don't know.
Probably. I don't understand why is it just not acceptable to punch someone if they're not taking any action?
So I guess so if they're not taking any action, I agree. Then don't punch them. Like don't.
But why? Why not punch them?
I don't understand why because there's no net positive that could come from that violence.
Yeah, but that's exactly that. I tell you, I'm genuinely surprised that you are saying this, because for me, it's a point of principle that it's wrong to bring violence into the political system. That's the point of a democracy, is to prevent violence from occurring. And so if you're just sat there going, well, I just think it's going to cause further problems for my movement, that's a pragmatic argument. That you don't have any principles when it comes to doing.
I mean, what if you think that violence is the best way to prevent more violence?
Well, I'm asking you what you think. I mean, is that what you think?
That's the principle that I'm using. Is basically like, it's not okay to use violence unless you're using it wisely to prevent more violence.
Yeah, but that would imply a time of war. Right. Or like, there is some state, state of conflict.
I mean, we accept there's a sense in which we accept violence as basically just all politics is violence in a sense, right? Because even if you act through, well, yes, it is because agree. The government, why are they in control? I mean, because of the police, because of the military, like that's. But that's to divorce the government from the people who support the government and maintain the government and who are the government. Yeah. The government is, I mean, that's the point of a democracy, a representative democracy in our case. Yeah.
But that's the point, is that any one of us could run for office and become part of the government. We're not separate from it.
Right, but the government still has a certain structure, and that structure is maintained by the possibility of violence. Yes. That you could be incarcerated or executed or detained by the police.
That's not coming from an outside entity. That's something we all consent to.
That's the official story, yeah.
Well, no, that has to be the case if we all live in a society. I mean, if you want to live near other people, you're going to need to be together.
So this is like the social contract idea, right? Which is that we're basically consenting to it by
I mean, and you can leave and wander off into the wilderness where there is no long arm of the law, if you want.
Yeah, right.
But this is the point, isn't it? It's not, and I think this is like these kind of like artificial divisions end up creating theoretical problems. But going back to it, I really like the idea that you don't think in principle someone has the right to go unmolested just because despite their beliefs is that, I mean, that's crazy. That's not a point of principle to me.
Yeah, it's not really about their beliefs. Like, so I mean, imagine a situation where the KKK or whatever is marching through a black neighborhood saying, talking about how you will not replace us, they want a whites only country or something. Yeah. Like, I feel that that's like a fundamentally intimidating gesture, right? Sure. Like, they're saying, we want you out, we want a country that does not include you. And so I get why that feels like threat of violence to a lot of people. And if they respond with violence, like, I think probably it's not a good idea, because again, it's, but I also am, as you can tell, reluctant to outright say that I condemn it.
Why though? I mean, I even if the KKK decide to march through Harlem or something, in fact, Harlem's probably a bad example these days, but some rough black neighborhood, and they get attacked, you should still condemn the people doing the attacking, because they are allowed to speak. As I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be surprised if they get their asses beaten. I'm not exactly going to be like, my goodness, didn't see that coming. And I'm not going to have any sympathy for them, obviously, but it's still wrong to violate their rights in that way, even if they're being deliberately provocative and I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. It's still wrong to do it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's like wrong. Maybe it's a situation where it's wrong, but I'm not going to get real broken up about it.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, that's fine. Yeah, I'm not going to get broken up about it. Yeah, I might even laugh occasionally. But the point is, I would still, if it came down to, okay, what are the moral principles involved here? And this is the thing, right? I think that this is where ideology informs your morality, and I think this is the difference between like a liberal and a Marxist. A Marxist doesn't necessarily have fixed principles in this way, because they don't have the same worldview, and you don't have moral and principled consideration for your enemies. That's the problem.
I don't think I mean, it depends what we mean by Marxist. There's a lot of different kinds of Marxists. I don't think that believing in Marxist or socialist economic principles entails any necessary position about morality and about the humanity of your opposition.
It necessitates it. You can't eradicate the bourgeoisie without removing moral consideration from the bourgeoisie. I mean, I can't remember, was it Thomas Paine or someone who he pointed out that rich people have rights too? They're not non-people just because they're rich. Even if you've somehow worked your way around to justifying taking away what they have and murdering them because they had it. It's not.
Yeah.
There's no less people.
I think that like any kind of like socialism that I would get behind does not want to eradicate the bourgeoisie in the sense of like killing all of those people. It wants to get rid of the bourgeoisie as a class, not by killing them, but by changing the economic relationships that mean there is a thing, a collective entity called the bourgeoisie, right?
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand the contention of the peaceful Marxists.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's still a form of eradication. Why should you have the power to get rid of these people?
Well, it's not getting rid of them, it's getting rid of their class. It's getting rid of their economic circumstances.
Yeah, but why should you have the right to do that?
Because, so again, I'm not really a Marxist, so I don't know why I'm defending them. But
yeah, I don't either, if you're not.
But the argument would be that because the economic system that they're a part of is inherently exploitative, and so in order to end the exploitation, you have to change the structure of society.
Okay, but changing it to a socialist system is not less exploitative, in my opinion. In fact, it seems to be more exploitative. I mean, there is greater economic wealth disparity in somewhere like Cuba than there is in somewhere like Sweden.
So do we want to have a socialism versus capitalism argument?
Well, I'll win that. That's easy. So I don't think we should have it. But what I mean is, it's not that you want something that's not exploitative, because socialism is exploitative, and the end of personal ownership and things like this. These are really terrifying concepts that have always ended badly. I mean, I don't really want to get into it. I wanted to get into the moral dimension of it, to be honest, because I find that more interesting. But I mean, like, do you not see a problem with forcing this on people who? And I don't necessarily agree that. I mean, there are forms of capitalism that are exploitative, and there are certainly companies and corporations operating in that way. You know, I'm not like some giant white knight capitalism. It's perfect. It didn't do nothing. You know, I totally agree that capitalism has major flaws, and I think one of the problems we have is lobbying and government as well. And I think that's like, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Maybe it's inevitable that representative democracy in capitalism ends up with exploitative neoliberalism. Maybe that's an inevitability that we didn't think to guard against, and we should have done, you know. But it's a discussion for another time. But I mean, it just really bothers me that you don't have a firm moral principle on not punching someone if they're doing nothing wrong, even if they're a Nazi.
Well, I think if they're a Nazi and they're doing public demonstrations of their Nazism, they are doing something wrong.
They're not, though. They're completely within their rights to do that.
They're in their legal rights, but maybe not their moral rights.
I don't know what you mean by moral rights. You personally don't consider it moral, but you're not you're not like you don't think there's objective morality, do you?
Well, I do think. I think, for the sake of argument, I do think there's objective morality.
Really? Okay. Where does that come
from? Reason, let's say.
So are we talking social contract, basically?
Something like that.
Yeah?
But
that's exciting. I'm interested in hearing more about that. Go on.
Okay, so basically, you know, right? You can do something. So legal rights, you're allowed to do all kinds of things that you still like morally should not do. Like you're like allowed to like
marry your cousin or something like that.
Marry your cousin or sleep with your best friend's wife or without his permission or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? But you shouldn't do that. I feel like, I don't know. There are just situations where it's like if your if your best friend sleeps with your spouse without permission, and you punch them, like I guess you shouldn't have punched them. Like, but also like that's how I feel about the KKK.
In that sense, I can understand
like,
it being. It's kind of forgivable, isn't it?
That's how I feel about punching the KKK in Harlem.
Yeah,
it's like. There are certain things that it's like fighting words, you know.
Yeah, no. And this is the thing. Like I say, I'm not saying there aren't times where it's not easily forgivable, but I really do think the default position should be, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of, I mean, what you've done in the past. You know, if you are standing there presenting no threat to anyone at all, then punching you is utterly unjustified. And
so I definitely agree that's the default position, but I feel like if you're the KKK marching in Harlem, then you're maybe not posing no threat to anyone at all.
Well, even if you, I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, when you've got, like, say you had like 1,000 guys in hoods walking through Harlem, maybe that could, you know, you might think, well, Christ, they're actually here to do violence.
It's pretty threatening.
Like yeah, sure. But talking about, like, say, the punching of Richard Spencer, You know,
Yeah.
and I know you've already said that you didn't agree with that, so I'm not trying to but it disturbs me how much of a meme this was on the left, and how eager to punch Nazis fat, overweight people who have never punched anyone in their lives are. Garrett, you know.
Well, I think that the reason, I mean, I sort of understand emotionally why they like it.
I agree.
I mean, and I found that, for instance, like when at first I was very reluctant actually about it, but I don't know, I was doing a stream the other day right after my How to Recognize a Fascist video came out, and like the stream got rated by 4chan, so the comments are all, you know, fashy. So I just turned the camera off and just played a loop of Richard Spencer being punched, and then they just eventually got cleared out. So it's like, well, okay, that was useful, wasn't it? But like, so again, it's not like is it the morally high ground? Like, no, not really. But also,
Okay.
That's the extent of my feelings about it.
No, that's honestly that's fine. Right, so we've been going for just over an hour, so I figure I'll wrap it up here. But I'd be more than happy to have you on again to talk about any of the notes I made to talk to you about, which we didn't cover in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I think that we're probably not going to run out of things to argue about. So thanks for having me on.
Well, that's all right. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, actually. It's obviously difficult to have an honest conversation with someone on the other side a lot of the time.
It is.
You know, so I think that was really productive. But yeah, thanks for coming on, and I'm sure I'll speak to you in the future. And thanks for watching, everyone. Take it easy.